The Sheikh's dark secret. The curse that killed. Hook. What happens when you uncover a secret so dark? It traps your soul forever. This chilling tale of a cursed palace, a mysterious sheik, and a deadly truth will make you question the cost of knowledge. Stay with us until the end to uncover the shocking twist that no one sees coming. Creak, creak. The wind howled through the narrow passage. It sounded like a warning. The desert stretched endlessly outside, an ocean of sand. Inside the ancient palace, silence clung to every corner. I could feel the weight of the darkened walls around me, suffocating. My fingers brushed against the cold stone of the hallway, seeking guidance. But there was none. I moved deeper into the heart of the palace. The air grew thicker, heavy with secrets. The floor creaked beneath my feet, each step a betrayal of my presence. I shouldn't be here. The sheik had warned me, told me to never venture into this part of the palace. But curiosity is a powerful force. The torchlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. I passed the heavy wooden doors, all of them locked tight, except one. It stood slightly ajar. A faint smell of incense clung to the air. It was strange, almost too sweet, too thick. I hesitated. I shouldn't have opened the door, but my hand moved before my mind could stop it. The room inside was suffocating, dark, and strangely cold. The walls were lined with strange symbols, etched deep into the stone. I stepped forward. The floor was smooth, too smooth, as if it had been polished by time itself. The only light came from a single flickering candle in the far corner. There, on a raised platform, stood a figure, the sheik. He was unmoving, his back to me, draped in rich velvet. But there was something off about the way he stood. His shoulders were too still, too rigid. I took a breath, but the air seemed to tighten around my chest. "Sheik," I whispered, voice shaking. No response. I stepped closer. My heart pounded harder with each footfall. Suddenly, the sheik turned. His eyes, black as the night, locked onto mine. His mouth twisted into a grin that didn't belong. "Why did you come here?" he asked, his voice low and hollow. My body froze. A sudden chill ran down my spine. "Sheik, what is this place?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows. I couldn't see him anymore, but I could feel him watching, waiting. I should have turned and ran, but I couldn't move. The temperature dropped further. And then I heard it, a soft, guttural whisper, as if the walls themselves were speaking. "Leave now." I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. The whispering grew louder. It was coming from everywhere, seeping into my thoughts. Leave or die. Panic set in. I stumbled backward, knocking over the candle. Flames sparked and crackled on the floor. The room began to shake, the walls groaning as if they were alive. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. And then there was a shift. A figure moved from the shadows. The sheik. His eyes were not black anymore. They glowed, burning with an unnatural fire. His mouth was open, wide. Too wide. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the room. I couldn't breathe. Something cold wrapped around my neck. Tight, suffocating. I clawed at it, but it only tightened. I gasped for air. Then, in the eerie silence, the sheik's voice whispered in my ear, "You should have never known the truth." And then, everything went dark. Creak, creak. I woke to darkness. The air felt thick, stifling. I couldn't move. A weight pressed down on my chest, heavy, unrelenting. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. A faint rustling echoed in the stillness. It was coming closer. I strained my eyes, but there was nothing, just shadows, endless shadows. Then, a cold breath on my neck. I froze. A whisper, so close it sent a shiver down my spine. "You're still here," it hissed. The weight on my chest lifted, but my body remained paralyzed. My limbs felt like lead, unresponsive. I tried to turn my head, but it was as if something was holding me still. Something invisible, yet palpable. And then I felt it. The room around me shifted. The walls pressed in closer, suffocating, like they were closing in on me. A low, unsettling sound filled the air, like the groan of ancient stone. It grew louder. The temperature dropped, a biting cold now sweeping through the room. I could see my breath in the air, fogging in front of me. I tried to call out again. Nothing. The cold tightened its grip. I felt something move beneath me, alive, crawling, slithering in the dark. I shuddered, my body trembling. The sound of whispering grew louder, more frantic. Voices, thousands of them, whispering all at once. "You should not have come. You will never leave." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me. I was trapped in this nightmare. The shadows swirled, forming shapes, figures. I could barely make them out, but I knew they were there, watching, waiting. And then, through the haze of darkness, I saw him. The Sheikh. He stood at the far end of the room, his figure outlined in a strange, flickering light. His eyes were wide open, but empty voids. There was nothing left in them but darkness. "Why?" I managed to croak, my voice raspy and weak. The Sheikh didn't respond. He only watched, his face expressionless. A low hum began to vibrate through the walls, filling the room with a strange, unnerving energy. It pulsed, growing stronger with every beat. I felt it in my bones. The floor trembled beneath me. Then, with a sudden movement, the Sheikh stepped forward, his figure blurring with unnatural speed. I tried to cry out, but again, no sound escaped. His hand reached out, fingers cold as ice. I felt them brush my face. It was like ice had been poured into my veins. Frozen. I was frozen. And then, his voice echoed inside my head. "You cannot escape now." The world around me spun, disorienting, like I was falling into an endless void. And with the Sheikh's cold words still echoing in my mind, everything went black once more. Creak, creak. I awoke with a jolt. The air was thick with the smell of burning incense. My head pounded, and my limbs ached as if they had been stretched beyond their limits. I blinked, struggling to focus in the dim light. The room had changed. It was still dark, but now it felt ancient. The walls seemed to be alive, pulsating with a rhythm that matched the beating of my own heart. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I tried to sit up, but something was holding me down. A weight. I looked around, frantic. Chains. Heavy chains wrapped around my arms, my legs, pinning me to the cold stone floor. The room felt alive, but empty. The air hummed with a strange energy. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The silence was deafening. Then, a figure stepped into the flickering candlelight. The Sheikh. His face was no longer human. His skin was pale, stretched tight over a skull-like frame. His eyes, those burning, empty eyes, bore into mine with a coldness that sent a wave of fear crashing through me. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was a twisted grin, full of malice. "You were foolish to come here," he said, his voice low and guttural. His words echoed around the room, vibrating in my bones. I struggled against the chains, panic rising in my chest. "Why are you doing this?" I gasped, my voice barely a whisper. The Sheikh's grin widened, stretching unnaturally. "You wanted the truth," he murmured, his voice like silk, smooth but dangerous. "But now you will learn it." The temperature in the room dropped even further. I could see my breath, thick and misty in the cold air. The shadows in the room began to shift, swirling around the Sheikh, as if they were alive. I could feel their presence, pressing in from all sides. "What are you?" I asked, my throat dry, trembling. The Sheikh didn't answer immediately. Instead, he raised one hand, his fingers outstretched. A crackling energy pulsed from his fingertips, and the air around us began to warp. "I am the keeper of secrets," he said. "The truth you sought comes with a price." I felt the chains tighten, squeezing the breath from my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The shadows grew darker, deeper, and the Sheikh's voice echoed louder in my mind. "You should have never come," he whispered, his words filling every corner of my consciousness. I tried to scream, but it was useless. The darkness was closing in, suffocating me. And then, as the last shred of light flickered and died, I realized the terrible truth. There was no escape. Not anymore. Creak, the air thickened, pressing in on me like a living thing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The Sheikh's shadow loomed over me, towering like a dark figure from a nightmare. His cold eyes burned into mine, empty yet full of something dark and ancient. "Do you understand now?" His voice was a low, menacing whisper. I tried to speak, but my lips wouldn't move. The chains around me tightened, digging into my skin, and I gasped in pain. The room seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart, the walls closing in, pressing tighter and tighter. The whispers returned, filling my mind, growing louder, sharper. "You should have left before you learned too much." The Sheikh's figure blurred, distorting, twisting into something unrecognizable. I tried to look away, but it was like my body was locked in place, trapped in the very gaze of the creature standing before me. The shadows writhed, shifting and contorting like living tendrils, reaching out for me, drawing closer with every passing second. My skin crawled. I could feel their cold touch, the coldness seeping through my body. And then I saw it. A figure emerging from the depths of the shadows. A woman. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and empty, like the Sheikh's, voids that swallowed the light. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She reached for me, her hands long and skeletal, her fingers trembling as they brushed against my face. I recoiled, but the chains held me firm. The woman's touch burned. Her skin was ice, colder than the room itself. I could feel the life draining from my body with every second that passed. The room seemed to collapse around me, the darkness closing in tighter, consuming everything. I felt the life slipping away, like sand through my fingers. And then, in the suffocating silence, the Sheikh's voice echoed again. "You wanted to know the secret," he whispered, his words sinking deep into my soul. "Now you will learn it." A sharp, searing pain pierced through my chest, and I gasped. The shadows surged, wrapping around me, pulling me further into the void. The woman's cold fingers gripped tighter, pressing deeper into my skin. And then I felt it. Something dark, something ancient, something that had been hidden for centuries. The secret, the truth. It wasn't knowledge. It was power. A power that tore through me, consuming me from the inside out, filling every corner of my mind with darkness. And in that moment, I understood. There was no escape from the Sheikh's secret. The darkness, the cold, the shadows. They had always been here, and they would never let me go. Creak, the darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. I could feel it tightening around my chest, smothering the air from my lungs. The shadows twisted, pulsing like a living heart, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it was my heart they were echoing. The pain intensified, a burning sensation that consumed every nerve in my body. I could no longer tell where my skin ended and the darkness began. The woman's grip tightened, her cold fingers digging into my flesh. Her touch was unbearable, like ice seeping into my very soul. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The Sheikh's eyes burned into mine, empty and hollow, watching, waiting. He wasn't a man. Not anymore. He was something far older, something darker. "Do you understand now?" he whispered, his voice slithering into my mind. The words felt like they were carving themselves into my brain, leaving scars. This was what he was. This was his curse. He wasn't just a man of power. He was the keeper of death, the guardian of the shadows. The secret he hid wasn't one of wealth or knowledge. It was the secret of eternal suffering, of power forged in darkness. The woman, her eyes locked onto mine, filled with a hollow sorrow, as if she, too, had once been trapped in this nightmare. She was him. They were the same. The Sheikh had traded his soul for power, for immortality. But what was power if not a prison? I understood now, and in that understanding I felt something snap inside me. A whisper, a dark thought, crept through my mind, tempting me with an impossible idea. Could I, too, become part of this secret? Could I take the Sheikh's place? The thought filled me with horror. Yet the darkness, the shadows, they called to me. I could feel them crawling beneath my skin, itching, urging me to give in. The woman's grip loosened, and for a moment I thought I had escaped. But no, I was pulled back, dragged deeper into the abyss, into the heart of the shadow itself. The Sheikh's voice echoed again, this time louder, more commanding. "You will join us," he said, his voice reverberating through the darkness. "You are already one of us." And as his words sank into my bones, I felt it. The chains around me snapped. I was no longer trapped by the cold stone of the room. I was part of the darkness now. The shadows wrapped around me like an old friend, and I realized with growing horror that there was no escaping it. No escaping him. The Sheikh's secret had claimed me, as it had claimed so many before me. And as my soul was consumed by the abyss, I could only hear one thing. The slow, rhythmic creaking of the walls. Creak, creak. The creaking grew louder, more intense, as if the very walls were alive, groaning in agony. I felt them closing in, tighter and tighter, the shadows pressing from all directions. The cold seeped deeper, gnawing at my bones, my very essence. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed, trapped within the suffocating darkness. The Sheikh's figure loomed before me, his presence a constant weight upon my chest. His eyes, those empty, burning eyes, locked onto mine once more. "You are mine now," he whispered, his voice soft, but powerful. And with those words, I felt something shift within me. A cold, dark power surged through my veins, like poison flooding my blood. I could feel the shadows crawling beneath my skin, moving through my thoughts, wrapping around my mind, twisting everything inside out. I was no longer just a prisoner. I was becoming him. The room around me warped and flickered, as if reality itself was bending, folding in on itself. I was being pulled deeper, pulled into the abyss where the light couldn't reach. I could hear the whispers again, thousands of them, all speaking in unison. They filled my mind, drowning out my thoughts, my sanity. "You will never leave," they chanted. "You are one of us now." The woman's hollow, empty eyes flashed in my mind, a reflection of what I was becoming. A prisoner just like her, a keeper of secrets, cursed to never know peace. I struggled, tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the shadows. There was no escape. The Sheikh stepped closer, his form a blur, his smile widening. "I was once like you," he said, his voice a soft caress against my mind. I sought the truth. I thought I could control it. His laughter echoed around the room, dark and hollow. "But the truth doesn't set you free," he murmured. "It traps you." The shadows pulsed, thickening, wrapping around me tighter. And in that moment I understood. This was the curse, the secret. The knowledge was a prison, and once you knew it, you could never unknow it. You could never leave. I felt my body begin to change, my mind shifting, becoming something else, something far older. The woman's face appeared again, and I saw the sorrow in her eyes. She had been him once, and now I was becoming her. The Sheikh's secret had claimed me, and as the last shred of my humanity faded, I felt the darkness fully consume me. I was no longer alive nor dead. I was part of the shadows now, a keeper of secrets, trapped in an endless night. Creak, creak, I could feel it, the change creeping through my veins as cold as the night itself. It wasn't just the shadows, it was the truth. The curse that had once claimed the Sheikh was now claiming me. I tried to fight it, to hold on to some piece of myself, but it was slipping through my fingers like sand. The walls groaned, the very stones alive, vibrating with a low hum. The air was thick, suffocating. The room seemed to stretch and twist, warping, becoming something otherworldly. I was being pulled into the dark depths. The Sheikh's laugh echoed, hollow and twisted. "You will never leave," he repeated, his voice like a cold wind, empty and final. I struggled against the shadows, but they were part of me now, wrapping tighter, curling around my mind. It was too late to turn back. The woman's face flashed in my mind again, the hollow, empty eyes staring at me, offering no sympathy, no escape. The truth was a prison, a never-ending nightmare. The power I sought, the knowledge I craved, it had a price I had already paid. And as I felt the last remnants of my humanity fade, I realized something terrible. The Sheikh had lied. He had told me I would become him. But no, he had become the darkness. And now so had I. There was no more Sheikh, no more woman, no more prisoners. There was only the void. The shadows had claimed us all. They were the true masters, the true keepers of the secret. And as the last of my thoughts slipped away, I understood fully what had been hidden for so long. We weren't just bound to the palace. We were bound to the secret itself. We were trapped eternally in the very thing we sought to control. And as the darkness swallowed me whole, I could hear the faintest sound echoing through the abyss. Creak, creak. It was the sound of the walls closing in on me. The sound of eternity. The sound of a secret never meant to be known. And it would never end. The darkness was suffocating, yet somehow still there was a strange calm within it. The oppressive weight of the shadows, the cold, the silence, they had all become a part of me, wrapped around my soul. I no longer fought it. I couldn't. I had no strength left. The whispers in my mind had faded to a dull hum, like an old memory that lingered without meaning. I could no longer remember what it felt like to be alive, to have hope, to have purpose. I was here in this endless night, where nothing existed but the shadows. The Sheikh's presence was gone. His form dissolved into the very walls, into the air. But his voice, his laughter, still echoed in the corners of my mind, like a fading song. It no longer held any power over me. I had become what I had feared. I was a keeper of the secret now, bound to the eternal darkness, part of something far beyond human understanding. It wasn't a curse anymore. It was simply what I was, what I had always been meant to become. For the first time, I felt a strange peace, like I had finally come home to a place I had always known deep down, but never truly understood. The room around me was no longer just a place. It was a part of me, as if my soul had merged with the very fabric of this endless, silent abyss. The creaking of the walls had slowed, almost stopped, as if the palace itself had settled into its final, eternal slumber. I stood alone, but I wasn't afraid. I could feel the presence of those who had come before me, the lost souls who had sought the truth, who had craved knowledge. We were all part of the same secret now, no longer separate, no longer fighting to escape. We were the shadows, and in the darkness, there was no beginning, no end. There was only eternity. Creak, creak, and then silence.